Hello and welcome. If you're watching this and not just listening, I have found a much better spot, at least this week, to record from. And we are back again. And this week we're going to talk about notes specifically, and feedback. I know we've touched on this a bit in our writing episode in the past, but, we kind of just want to do a little, bite sized. I say that now. Wait until the part two, but a bite-sized kind of episode on, notes in general, how to give notes or be thinking about them. How do you receive them? That kind of stuff, pet peeves. I think we mostly talked about pet peeves last time, but yeah, there's a bit of an art to giving notes.
Yes.
And yeah, we'll make, I think Tanya, you always referenced another great podcast. I had a great episode about this, but we're
Mhm.
not going to send you over there right now. You're going to listen to this one first, and then Tanya will mention what that podcast is that you should listen to after this. So yeah, notes.
Yes. Notes. My
Where do we
favorite
want to start?
thing.
I guess I hadn't thought of necessarily a flow of them, but how do we okay, how to give notes, right? Like in your, write to writer or that or even asking for notes. Maybe let's start there, right?
Well,
When
that's
you're
a good place
asking
to
for
start.
notes, how are you thinking about it? Or what do you keep in mind when you're asking for notes, or how do you set it up? Or yeah, where are you getting notes from or seeking them from?
Well, I think that that's a really good question, and it is really I've learned over the years the hard way, which
Yes,
maybe you
yes.
learned this too, is, the best results is to ask for what you want, right? And put
Yeah.
parameters on it. If you send somebody something and say, "Just tell me if you like it." Oof. I mean,
Yeah.
that is a
Yeah.
bad
Yeah.
move
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
it could go on for days, right? Like, I mean, it's just
It
too
could
open-ended.
It's too open-ended. It could go on for days. I think ask for what you want is a really good way to put it. And when we're talking notes, like this applies to at any point along the creative process. Like I would think this works for cuts too. And, when
Yes.
you're in the edit and things like that. I think another key thing in terms of asking what you want, right? Like, I guess it's know what you want and then pick the person that might be best suited to give you that kind of thing, right?
Like,
Like, I've had people ask me for notes on a script, and it's a horror script, the kind of odd horror script. And so while I think I give good notes or know how to assess things like good enough that for like as a general take, I give those notes, but I'm a comedy girl. I really don't like horror at all, right?
mm,
So one of two things is either that person's asking me because they trust my opinion or that I will give it to them. Like they trust that I understand story period and just want my insight on it, right? Or they know, "Oh, I'm trying to be more comedic with this horror script actually, and I want it to ride that line. So I'm sending it to you specifically to see if there's the funny that jumps out kind of
well,
thing." So
exactly.
you kind of want to think about who, listen, that even includes if you just want to listen, this is my first time I'm sharing it with somebody. I'm sending it to a warm room, right? Like letting people know where you're at too, because if I know someone is just like, I just wrote it, I just want to share it with someone, I'm excited, I finished it, that context matters in how I'm going to give notes as much as I have a deadline for, whatever grant or to go to whatever funders and I need to cut 3 pages kind of thing is as
A
important.
100%. Like, the last, request for notes I sent out was about a story, and I specifically said and it was to somebody who I knew, like, was into this material, right? So exactly to your point, but very specifically saying, "I was just wondering if the way I was describing it and writing it out made sense," because there was
Yeah.
quite a bit of stage direction in it, which I was insecure about whether or not it was coming through properly, and it was the part that I was working out in my head.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like, don't worry about the loopholes. Don't worry about like, does that make sense? It's like, I haven't even gotten there. And I know that those pitfalls are there. Like, that's not what I'm interested in right now. I'm just trying to lock down the stage direction voice and how I'm going to do the stage direction for the rest of the thing. So does it make sense was my only question. Like, do you understand
Mhm.
what I'm trying to say? Am I confusing you? Does it not make sense or make sense? That's it. Whether or not,
Mhm.
we can talk later. Hopefully you'll do another round of notes or what have you. But like to your point of like, if you're looking for jokes, it's like, I wanna make this funnier. Can you point out
Mhm.
the parts where there's like it's ripe for a joke, right?
Mhm.
Or something that like, whatever. Or like, yeah, just simple things where, yeah, you're like, I think I lost. lost steam in the last half. Or, I think the
Yeah,
third act is
yeah,
where I'm feeling I need help. Are you also getting that feeling? So don't give me no like I like act one
yeah,
and act two.
yeah.
So just
It's like,
can you just read those so that you can give me notes on act three kind of thing?
yeah, and it's a bit, and like, you might not always have these kind of parameters around it, but it is just important to know, like, you're not necessarily sending it to the network being like, don't note on act one and act two, it's just act
Hmm.
three kind of thing. But you might send it them to the saying like, okay, here's where I'm at. Act three still is coming along, so that so that you don't get a bunch of notes from the network being like, three really seems like the weak point or what. I mean, they
Yes.
probably will still because that's them. But, right, at least you're priming it. You're kind of getting ahead of that. No, I think you can think of it like a diagnosis, or like, not a diagnosis, sorry, like, yeah, a bit of an assessment of where your blind spot might be one way or
Mhm,
another in terms of making it the strongest script it could possibly be. And
mhm.
that, and so, because similarly, if you were to think of, if I was writing a sci-fi thing, right, or something about an astrophysicist, it would make complete sense to go to an astrophysicist or someone with that understanding specifically and be like, can you make sure that this science holds up, or, this
Yeah.
feels true to the cause in the same way. So similarly, right, initially when I was doing Bria, like, I don't come from a formal, writing, screenwriting background or anything like that. I mean, I've read Save the Cats and those kinds of things, but nothing formalized. So when I first started writing, it's kind of very instinctual and from scripts I had read before. I was reading a lot of different scripts at the time. But when I was building that room, right, one of the things I knew that I wanted was someone who did have that background and knew structure like really well and could help me identify, like, oh, looking at this, like, your A story is strong, but the B story kind of falls apart. You never get back to it, kind of thing, or
Mhm.
that kind of insight. And so similarly, in the same way that you would for like a specific subject matter research, right? A specific weak spot or something that you're not feeling strong about is kind of how you could sharpshoot the notes that you're seeking. Even sometimes sending it to producers just to understand the financing limitations, or like notes from a financing perspective. What would make this more attractive, right,
Mhm.
as a financing project, or what do you see might be the hurdle someone would come up against, so that when you're pursuing financing you have a strong understanding of, like, yeah, again, getting ahead of what those questions or notes may be.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that sort of brings us to maybe the flip side of that is when somebody's asked you for something, right?
Yeah,
Like when somebody's made that request of you to give notes, being respectful of what they've asked you to do, right? Like, so if
yeah,
they've asked you, um, yeah, for a punch up or, to poke holes in the logic or whatever it is, right?
yeah,
That you give them those notes, and it doesn't mean that you can't say anything else, right? But be very measured about what else you're saying, right? Like,
yeah,
especially and
yeah,
again, this is why I think it's so good to sort of front load where the thing is weak or where you're going to change it. Like, don't get hung up on this. This is gonna change. I've already got that in mind, but I want like, so, like, make sure that you're reading that very carefully and, like, giving the notes that they have requested from you, and anything beyond that, just make sure that you've read their initial reach out, right? And, like,
yeah.
and don't ignore it and say something that, like, indicates that you didn't read it or that you're just like not paying attention to what they've asked you because it can be
Or
a sneaky thing, right? Like,
overreaching, right?
well,
Or overreaching
exactly, yeah.
because
Well,
there
that was
might be
gonna be
a reason why they haven't asked you specifically on everything else, because they know, well, Sasha, you and I have talked before and you don't like horror like this, right? But I know
yeah.
you're a comedy so thing. So me being like, oh, I wouldn't have felt scared at XYZ point, kind of
Mhm.
thing, might just not hold the same weight to them when what they're looking for is like, oh, again, you don't even have to offer the joke, but even to say, well, she's talking about this while he's trying to do this, that's a big moment where you could put some humor in, right?
Exactly.
Is kind of what Tanya's talking about. And I think I would go further, like, when you have been asked that, and maybe like my friend who sent me that horror feature, I remember reading by the end being like, oh, I guess we never really, like, one of the first thing that I said in caveating the notes, which is horror is not my genre, right? Like, I do understand story and these kind of things. So, but keep in mind, some of these moments that I'm talking about might land different for someone who is like tried and true in this kind of horror genre. Cause it was also a very kind of like, it was more one of those like unsettling, something
Mhm.
is not quite, somewhere between Nope and Get Out kind of horror. It wasn't necessarily
Right.
like shock
Suspense.
value kind of horror. So even further removed, I think, from the kind of thing that I I would normally watch or I'm a fan of kind of thing. So whether I don't know if they knew that or not, but I front loaded my notes with that, right? So they could also like, I assume you have some respect for my opinion or trust my opinion when I'm giving it to you. So I want to let you know, like, hey, here's
Mhm.
how I'm going to be reading this, or here's the person that's reading this thing. This
Yeah.
could, this beat and this beat could land really different because it did have an eerie effect to it. It could land, in the haunting way you're thinking for someone who likes this kind of or what have you. So I think
Mhm.
it's totally fair to caveat your notes that way as well too. And I do think
Yeah.
sometimes I wish more network notes had those kind of caveats, right? Because sometimes they ask things that feel like, oh, do you not like, I find often a limitation with network notes is they'll be like, oh, is she gonna face any challenge? Is she gonna face any challenge trying to get to the bar that night? And you've put like two or what you thought were two or three foils or clear foils
Yes.
in her, or like, will she face any bigger challenge, I guess might be the question, in trying to get to the bar this night. But
Yeah.
you put at least one what you thought was one foil in between her and getting to the bar. So it's like, okay, my first question comes, do you not like what's already in there, or is what's already in there not reading as a big enough
Yes.
foil for you, or are you asking for more on top of that kind of thing?
So this is one of my pet peeves. I mean, this is such a
Hmm.
good point, and this is such a nuanced point. Is first of all, that is a good question, right? Like that note is a good note, right? Because there's two. The good way is to ask a question. It's like, is this character
Yes, that
going
is
to
true.
like
That is true.
get more,
Yeah, that's so
face
true.
more
Sorry to
adversity on
interrupt
her way
you.
to the bar. Because
Sorry
the
to
other
interrupt you.
way that it goes, and you know this, right, is that like, I think that she should do this, X, Y, Z.
Yes,
She needs
yes,
more, and
yes,
here are my ideas of how you put more obstacles in her way. And then
yes,
like it just so quickly teeters onto like collaborating on the script now, right? Like you're
yes.
like, so that is like the worst kind of note you can get is like, I got a great idea of how you can make your script better. Here are all my ideas for your script. No, no, no. That
Or
is a great note of just saying that. And I like for when I get those kinds of notes, what I usually think of is same as you question. It's like, oh, I thought she did have obstacles. So I go back and I read what I've read or wrote, right? Like, and if I can see clearly, like, oh no, this is a shit ton of obstacles. There's a lot of obstacles. And it's like, I guess it's not coming through. So do you just need to rewrite, like just use bigger
yeah,
adjectives? Because again, you're sort of seeing it in your head, especially if you're going to shoot it or direct it, right? You know exactly what the meal you'll make out of that beat. But if it's not written that way, does it just not like they just don't see it, right?
yeah, yeah.
Having those questions and you trying to answer that question is the way you like, that's a perfect note, right? Like that's exactly what you want. Somebody's being like, hold up, just take a look at that there because A, what you intended isn't what the reader is receiving. Do you need to rewrite it just slightly differently? Or did they point out like, yeah, it actually does need to escalate more, like you need to change some things in content?
You're 100% right. The way that note, I'm saying it because that's how I would ask that note, but the note often comes to you as something like it's more like definitive, like there's no challenge, right? There needs to be more challenge, or it would be great to see her have challenges before she thinks like, does she, run into her ex or this or that? And so, but the question really is there going to be more in her way, right? That
Yeah.
is the question, because it does prompt the thought of exactly what you just described. So you're right. That is the thing. And then yeah, and again, I think you can even caveat that. I sometimes when I give notes, I'll be like, I can't wrap my head around the kind of person that would do this right at this beat, but that
Mhm.
could just be because of how I'm not used to being around this kind of thing or what have you. Or maybe, sometimes I'll think like, oh, is it because there's a counterintuitive beat earlier above, right? That makes this one
Right.
not feel true to it or something like that. But I often will, like, I try as much as possible to just acknowledge if I do think, and it reveals itself. Sometimes just, I
Yeah.
understand like, oh, no, this is not here or this isn't happening because of this. So it's not like I'm, asterisking every note that I give, but there are instances where I'm like, oh, well, maybe this is, and you try to give some genuine benefit of the doubt, really, right? In what
Yeah.
you're reading, and ask a question that could get that answer or get them thinking in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So those are like very common, straightforward solves for like how to give notes, how to ask for notes. The next one I would think is important is
Oh,
like
the only thing that I'll say about how to ask for notes too, the two other important things is one, an example why the context is important because I've had it happen to me and I've had it happen where I said something to like a producer or a friend for like, hey, let me know what you think, kind of thing, and then give notes, and they ended up giving like edit notes, and we were locked right
well, this
on the
is what
edit,
my third thing
and
was going
had
to
to be
be.
like, thanks, but kind of thing. And if you have a timeline, if you
Yes.
want notes back for like a draft because you have this, or whatever. And if it's like whenever you can, unfortunately, take it from me as a person, I'm gonna do it whenever I can, which might mean 4 weeks from now or 6 weeks. So if you have, even if it's to say like, I'd love it in the next 2 weeks, I'm gonna try and do a rewrite, but like, whenever it works for you kind of thing,
Yes.
that's better than if it's not open ended, don't leave it open ended.
Yes, that's a very good point. Very good point. Timelines, people like parameters, right? Like, I guess that's one of the things we're saying is just like put parameters over the request or around the request. But the next thing that I think is really important is, especially like it almost seems like a given when you're requesting notes, but when you're giving notes on something, be aware like of what can change, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
you're going to suggest, I think this character should actually be a child or be this type of person or visually look like this, right? And it's like, we've already cast this thing, babe. I'm asking you for like notes on this scene, right? Like
Yeah, 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 yeah,
that
yeah,
ship
yeah,
has
yeah.
sailed, right? And similarly, especially when you're asking for notes on an edit, right? The thing is shot. Like be aware of like what can
Yeah.
change and what can't change. There was something I was giving
And
notes on it.
understand how significant it would be to suggest certain things, right? If
Yeah.
like if you're gonna say like, I'm sorry, this really isn't like, if you can't remove this and just make the story work without it, kind of thing, but understand what kind of note
Yes.
that would be to give.
Well,
Yeah.
exactly, right? And I think if you're going to give huge notes like that of like, okay, well, this is a big note, but I think this is how it would play out, right? Like this scene is a real like dog's breakfast. Like if you can pull that out, you should probably pull that out. And to your point, right? Like, but that might be tied to three other scenes in the show or the film. Like you can't lose those scenes, right? Like it's like think about those notes before you give them. Just exactly what you were saying. And like there was one I was giving notes on an edit, and it was like there was one really, 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 really rough scene. It was just like so much rougher than the rest of the movie, and it just came to like a record scratch halt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the worst part is like in moments like that, it can also make you as a viewer kind of question like the quality of the
Mm-hmm.
entire thing, right?
Yeah.
Like you've been on this ride, it's great, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
this is really good, and then all of a sudden, it's terrible, and you can see all the hands, all the craft of it, and you're like it gives you the ick, like exactly what the ick is, right? Like all of a sudden you're just like you're turned off and you can't get turned back on. Like you're just like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm out. I'm like, I can't get back into this movie. So like those
Which
are the
again, like if you know that's a like this is rough, especially when something is wholly reliant on VFX or something like that.
yeah,
Like if the whole movie looks one way and then there's a big departure or so, and that part's not patched. And even when you're submitting to festivals, right? That's why you put no VFX, no this, no what have you. So people are primed to a certain degree, right? For a
yes,
certain level of that kind of stuff. It does you no favors to go in and by description and they think like, oh, okay, this is their first cut, they're expecting something else, and then it's that off the mark. It just colors how they feel about so much of it, right? And the
a
notes you're going to
hundred
get back.
percent.
So you're trying to get the most authentic and sincere response to the work one way or another. And
Yeah.
for better or for worse, they're not seeing the final product, right? So some of these handles are necessary to ensure that you're getting like the quality note that you're after.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so like those things are just really tough. I mean, that's a tough note to give of just like this scene is really like taking down your movie. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, unless I'm not seeing it completely polished or whatever, but like if this is, like you said, like unless there's something still to come, like VFX but like if it's a straightforward thing of like, it's really hard those tough notes of giving them without sort of trying to think of a solution, right? Like trying to
Mm-hmm.
help you know, the person who's requested your help basically of like, I would strongly suggest trying it without the scene, seeing if there's any way that you could make it without this
Yeah.
scene. And yeah, just as firmly as you can. But those are, I think, are the toughest notes when it's like, oh well, this is a real a really tough one, but like, yeah, you want to give that note, but like, and do that very sparingly. Like, I would just never tell anybody to take out anything, right? If I was being asked to just view it, I would just stick to like, this is where it's singing. If you have any more of these kind of takes, these are spectacular, or like, I really like this, what you're doing here, or these two characters really just, when they're on screen, I'm captivated. So like, lean on that kind of thing, but like try to be supportive and point out the strong suits. And that I think is very specific to an edit, right? When you know that they can't reshoot something, they're not going to be able to, like, the dialogue is what it is, the story is what it is, the footage is what it is, right? Like,
I mean, yes, I think it's true. It does have bigger stakes at the edit point, but I think sometimes even at script point, right?
mm,
I've heard a pitch before, and so you can imagine this, like reading this in script form, where the story was all about this kind of marquee character and a name cast person was going to be in the thing. When you listen to what the story was about, you're like, I don't know. Best friend is the character that I'm more interested in
yeah,
and feels like is the vehicle for this thing. And, XYZ name cast that I see why you have in the lead is not this best friend like, so there is a potential sometimes for notes to have that kind of big impact depending on where
mhm,
you're at. So yeah, as much context and as much thinking as, like, listen, as we said, we've learned all of this the hard way, right? It's, you can just absolutely turn to your friend and be like, give me some notes on this kind of thing. We're just kind of
mm,
sharing, you know, writ large, the way that you can be approaching it and maybe some of the ways that you want to be thinking about it, right, when you do
yeah,
get notes. I think I want to touch, there's two other areas I want to talk about uh, before we wrap up. And one is, so then receiving them, right? And I guess the emotional reality of receiving them sometimes. And this is why sometimes that context helps. Because again, I don't think that producer would ever be giving me edit notes if I had said that this was a locked thing, right? I think we're much more likely to talk about the strong points, be like, this is here. I see that it kind of dips here, but it does, I just think the notes would have been framed differently. Or you would have given me a note for future, right? Like, I
yeah,
see what you were trying to do with this scene. Next time, if you're ever after something like this, sometimes tightening this gets you there just a little bit faster or something like that
mhm,
is much different than, yeah, I would try X this, and if you stitch this here and that kind of note. But the reality of it is too is, right, notes to a certain degree are also just notes, but they can have such a big impact on us. Like, it's such an emotional roller coaster doing the job that we do. And, you underestimate, because of the nature of our work, at least for me, how it feels like so much, and the kind of organic way that I think I gravitated towards writing and directing and that kind of stuff is, you're like, I'm shooting from instinct so often, right? This feels like something you need. This feels like a story I'd watch. This feels like a thing, whatever. That by the time you get into a space where you're like sharing something for notes from people who don't love you nearly as much, right? Or don't understand how your brain works or what have you, how vulnerable it can feel.
mhm,
Right. And depending on what else is going on in your life or whatever, like, sometimes notes are bullshit. Sometimes you did work so very hard on a thing. It's your best. You're like, this is money. And all you get is a wall of notes because vampire stories are now popular and they're trying hard as hell to shoehorn this thing in that direction. Right. And no real, and that can just be tough. I think that's one reality. But the other reality too is just like what's going on. Like, I've had the worst fucking stretch of luck. Worst week, worst day. You open up that inbox and here's the notes.
yeah,
It's a page worth of notes. Some are bullshit, some might be valid. That one's kind of cool. Fuck you too, kind of thing. And I'm over the whole thing. Like, fuck you and your mom and your dad and your entire lineage. You don't know shit about shit. And you're actually should feel privileged that I ever even shared my script with you to read, kind of thing.
yes,
9 times out of 10, when I'm feeling that way, there's so much more compounding on that moment, and that becomes the easy vessel. And if I have to give myself a day or two, I really don't like to respond to notes in any like quick manner kind of thing. I really do need to let them marinate, because there are sometimes just things that I'm resistant to because that's not how I was thinking of it or the day frame of mind that I was in. But the more I sit with it, the more it's like, yeah, that does
yeah.
this. And some of them fall away as bullshit, but the ones that are worth it do still hold up. And I try to respond to the notes from that place.
Yes. And I mean, that is just being so self aware, right? Like, that is just being mature. And you're so right. Like, yeah, how you receive the stuff, because I mean, you could easily receive it as criticism rather than, support. And so, yeah, like you feel like it's against you rather than trying to help you get to where you want to go.
Yeah.
And it's really probably mostly support, right? I find
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
very reading them and then putting them away and then rereading them like a day later is a really, really great idea. Because often, like, I mean, we've all heard the term, what's the note behind the note, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
have to decode things and just, like somebody might just not have the best way of like even drilling down on what they're really trying to get at, but they're just
Yeah.
flagging
Yeah.
something. And that's useful, right? Like just in and of itself, I think you can always tell a question from a suggestion, right? So a
Yeah.
question is like, is this character going to be this or that or do this or that? Or like, what about this? Like, what's going to happen further down the road or whatever versus like, I think they should do X, Y, and Z, and is basically trying to write a scene. Like those are motivated from two different places. One wants to be writing the script, in which case, in my mind, immediately they just get demoted. Their notes means far less to me because the agenda is not aligned with the goal, right? Like I'm not supposed to be helping you
Mm-hmm.
get a writer's credit on my script. You're supposed to be giving me notes, right? Like, but anything that's formed in a question is a good question. And like, I think if anytime you find yourself saying, well, they just didn't get it, okay, well, then that's the note. They didn't get it. So again, maybe you have to write it in a way that they will get it,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
it's still
Yeah.
back on you to communicate as best you can what you're after. So like
And I
it's different than what you were saying, which is like if I'm writing a horror screenplay or like editing a horror film and that's not your bag and like you're not into it, that's different than it's not that you didn't get it. It's not that you're into it, right? It's just like this isn't my lane, right? Like so, I wasn't super like rubbing my hands together waiting for this, right? In the way that you would for a comedy. But if they're like it didn't make sense here or there or like what's happening or like then there's questions and it's like yeah, then you should take that as the overall note of like it's not coming through yet, right? Like
Yeah. And on the notes call, that's the kind of stuff you can investigate further, right?
yes.
Because if you're talking about two, a pair of producers that first commissioned you to write the thing or option this, and now there's, two network partners and four studio partners, right? And so on any given notes call, there's 6 to 10 people, right? So I think you can ask, was this across the board or did it bump specifically for one or two people, right? Because that's the
Mhm.
other thing. If all 10 people read it and it wasn't clear and none of us got it, but everybody has a slight difference on how those notes come to you, right? Sometimes for a while you're in development, it's the main two people on the development team before it gets to a certain stage. And now the wider team is also giving notes, or there's when it's just internal between you and the production company. And then you loop in these people kind of thing. But if at every stage the note is the same, then sure. But if out of
Mhm.
10 people, two were like they didn't get it, then yeah, maybe it might need to make it clarify or something like that. But it's not like the whole beat, right, is utterly confusing because
Yes.
some people did understand it.
Yes.
Kind of thing. And I think, yeah, because the notes call to, and that's the kind of stuff that can help keep the notes call productive, right? And not, again, like a brainstorming session. If I ain't tell y'all I'm stuck or I'm not
Yes.
pitching out, like, there have been a time or two where I've gone on a notes call and been like, okay, thought about this beat more. I'm thinking something like this. I saw this note. Do you feel like that will help answer it? I feel like this. Then I get you riffing on that further back to me or something like that. But there's
Mhm.
been a time or two where it's like we're not even walking through the notes at this point. You're telling me scene
Yes.
by scene. You're like, give me, or when you know what I love the like, have you watched Margot's Got Money Troubles? Yeah. So when we watched that this week, you know what I love that they did? They had this wicked thing and it's gonna and you're like, right, but Margot's Got Money Trouble is already on TV. Like people are watching that right now.
Yes.
Why would I
Exactly,
let's
exactly. And I mean, and even yes, listen, my advice would always be don't ever do that. Don't ever try
yeah,
to riff in a room with producers or on a notes call because especially
yeah,
as women,
yeah, that's very true.
it will become the narrative that you're a collaborative, shoot the shit, spitball, brainstorm, riff on a
Yeah,
call, and that will just open up everybody's secret desires to ever write anything.
that's
And
very true. I would
that's all it
only
will
do
ever
it
become. right?
I would
Like,
only do that with people that I trusted.
yes,
And there's like
exactly.
maybe one or two producers. And honestly, they're more like creative producers, indie producers that I know, like you,
Yes.
Tamar and Eva, that I trust a
100%.
certain way more. So I think you're very right. I think you're
Yeah.
very right.
Like that, you have to be inner circle for that to happen
And
because
about receiving feedback too, like I would, because I was going to mention this too. The reality is that we're two women, right? And I think that could, this kind of, to a certain degree, I've been socialized, or I've seen that it will fare better for me to have a more measured response to certain notes and to things or whatever. And sometimes
Mhm.
I do still be pushing back, and I try to be as diplomatic about it as possible. But I also do think, there's two sides to it, right? There's like, the one, right? Ultimately, this is still a working partnership and relationship, and I don't want it to feel hostile. And also, I've been
Mhm.
a producer before. I don't want to take over your thing creatively, but I do want to feel like if I'm offering something or contributing to it or giving this to you to help shape the thing, that you respect my opinion, right? Creatively, which is why it matters how good you feel about your partners to begin with, right? Like
Yes.
you do want to be as often as possible in bed with people that at some point you at least felt aligned with creatively and taste wise, kind of thing.
Mhm.
If at the outset that's not there, I think that's really rough because, yeah, as a producer on the other side too, that job is so thankless in so many ways. And when the creative does really well, people are not like, oh, people aren't talking about the producer who made the show very rarely. If they are, it's very inside the industry. They're talking about the creator or the named star of the show. People are
Yeah.
not talking about the showrunner of Off Campus. They're talking about the characters of Off Campus that they love, right?
Yeah.
The people behind the scenes obviously end up playing a role, but I wonder how many people are aware of, like, you get what I'm saying? Like
Oh, yeah.
the other people become the face of the kind of thing. And so, yeah, you really just want to keep in mind in receiving it too, like what we're talking as women, we hear all the time about how men that are like, I'm not taking that fucking note. And, we're like, we'll just straight up in the meeting be like, that's stupid or this, that.
Mhm.
And there are, arenas and places and calls and Zooms happening where that is the response to notes. So, I mean, it's always
Yeah.
an option, right? And like sometimes notes are racist or misogynistic or like, and people don't realize their own blind spots. And you
Yeah.
could be absolutely justified to in being like, fuck that and that note, kind of thing. But I just want to, acknowledge that our approach is definitely informed by the fact that we're two women often navigating these spaces, even with other women on the other side. It's not all
Yes.
men, right? But it's still, we all absorb and are, living in under patriarchy. So we embody often a lot of those traits when we're in these power positions. And so, yeah.
1,000%. Like, I mean, on the few times that I can think of that you and I have been on a call and very matter of factly, very like diplomatically, professionally said no in no uncertain terms, right? Have
Hmm.
just said, rather than like, okay, well, we'll take that back and consider it. It's just like, just a very polite no. I mean,
Hmm.
you can feel people stiffen, right? That
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
very much like, oh, that's very aggressive.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
you and I are not aggressive, right? Like we're assertive, but like, you know what I mean, right?
No,
Like we're
100%.
not
And you
combative
do,
people.
even on Zoom, you feel it. Even
You do.
on
You're
Zoom.
just like everybody's just like like fucking clench. And you're
Yeah.
just like, I feel like now I've just painted myself as the enemy, like as difficult as
Yes.
because I
Yes.
said
Yes.
in the most polite, professional way possible, no.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of,
And not no over something that is like outside my bounds. Like
yeah.
no on
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
script
Yeah.
that we are writing,
Yeah. If
right?
I am
We're
the
being
creative
paid like
authority
in
here,
our jurisdiction, in our
yeah.
job on the project, we're just saying, no,
Yeah.
like not,
Yeah.
and not no to like, anyway, it's wild. So it's a touchy dance. So, rather than go there, I would just rather like never invite the idea that we're like, it's all, the more the merrier,
No, no,
all
I
cooks
think you're
welcome
right.
in the
With
kitchen.
network
Like,
notes and like and prodcos, like I wouldn't. I think
yeah,
I'm thinking more like in the instance, like for example, with New Metric and the First Look, right? Like I think that
yes,
was like a room where it's like we've already made a show together. We have like a host of a few ideas. We're talking about the market, what's interesting me a bit in
yes,
that way, and I trust that if I didn't want to go one way or another or what have you, they would respect that kind of thing.
yes,
But that's like otherwise it is all like I would say creative producers mostly, and there's just
yeah,
a handful that I've kind of been collaborating with for a while that I'd have that kind of conversation with. But I think you're right about like networks and studios don't. I know.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like
Not
you have
until
to
you
be
have you feel like you have the authority to say no and pivot and not feel everyone's asshole clench up at the same time,
yeah.
because yeah,
You're
it
just
can
like
feel
and to a pretty soft room, right? Like to a pretty
yeah,
warm room. The
yeah,
thing about like what you're describing with Mark and I think that that's the ideal thing because like I can think of there are some people that you're working with like if I was reading a script of someone that I sort of felt was inner circle, right? Like and we were working on something whether it was my script or I was giving notes to you or to anybody else that we know that we like give notes on. If 2 days after I had given the notes, I thought of something that was like a good beat or like an idea.
yeah,
And I was fully just being like, this is a one-way text, right? Like you don't need to respond to it. I'm just going to write it down, use it, don't use it, think about it, don't think about it. But like, I've seen those texts from like Mark, I'm like, I just had an idea.
yeah,
Use it,
yeah,
don't use it, whatever, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's an ideal sort of goal for a relationship with your producers and your partners, right? Of like when they do have a funny thought or idea, they just send it one way. It's like
yeah,
use it or lose it, doesn't matter. Like I'm just
yeah.
handing it to you and it's just yours to do with whatever you want, right? Like
Or I may have given this, I don't think I gave this example, but I do always I give him a lot of credit for this because did think it was so masterful in the moment. But he rarely is overly prescriptive. I like in the like, it's what about this kind of thing, right? Unless, yeah, like I don't recall that much from him. But one of the times when we were in prep, and I had in the final episode, there was like a scene that called for us to go by the airport or like at least be at the airport, on the highway would be a driving shot, not really highway, but whatever. And then like we're supposed to be at the airport drop off. A car accident is supposed to happen because the whole idea is that as soon as Bria's mom leaves, right, adulthood just comes crashing so quickly, right? And she already has to deal with insurance and all of this other stuff kind of thing. And she's just kind of plunging into the deep end. And on the way there, they were going to be singing a Celine Dion song, right? Kind of thing, her and her mom. And it was going to be sweet. I never really thought we were going to get the Celine Dion song. But again, that's not my business. I'm going to leave it in there until someone tells me no. And I remember him coming and being like, he asked first, he said, what do we want? What do you want out of this sequence of scenes? Like, what's the real thing? And that's when I said, well, it's the idea that like, as soon as her mom is gone, right? Like, she just, the adulthood just like starts hitting like bricks and nothing feels more adult and raw than having to deal with insurance and like the car that you just got that your mom just gave you right now is like can't show up for you, and then that would also bung up her move, so it would just create this ripple effect, as does sudden responsibility when you become an adult kind of thing. And he was like, okay, he's like, okay, great. He's like, the Celine Dion song, and I was like, I know, well, we might not get it, doesn't have to be. And so he's like, okay, well, so how about this? What if, right, her mom gets her an Uber, like her mom orders an Uber, right? Bria thinks she has to drop her mom off at the airport, but her mom surprises her, says she got an Uber, and she's leaving Bria her car, right? On the
yeah.
thing. So all of that happens outside of the house, right? Pretty much on the driveway, on the street where the exterior of their neighborhood house, right? And I was like, but what about, he's like, hold on. And then I was like, and then when she goes to go move, like she loads up the car, whatever, and notices it has a flat tire kind of thing. So she'll
Uh-huh.
have to like either call like for a tow or figure it out or whatever, but she has to go pick up the keys by a certain time. And so we still get the ripple effect of whatever, whatever.
Yeah.
And God damn it, it really did still give me the core beats of what I had just said was what
Yeah.
the scene was really about, and kept everything kind of like on the like within a location we already had. It wasn't going to be on the move anymore because also Malika can't drive. Shocking. I don't know if she can now, but at the time she couldn't. She didn't have her license, and it just like it was undeniable how like it really did just answer all of the story beats and bring down the scope of what we were trying to do to something that would fit the schedule. And I was like, all right, fine. I couldn't like I couldn't really fight it, right? It did answer all that stuff, and I could see how it would be just as funny or feel like as much of a surprise and all of that stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know why I started saying that,
Well,
but
just
it's
like
an
there are
example
people
of
who like trusted note givers, right? And people who are
yeah,
like in it to like, I mean, what you said at the beginning, right? Like asking for production notes. Cause like mostly that's a production note of
yeah,
like,
yeah,
we can get you what you want emotionally and, prime for funny beats, but like scope wise, from a production standpoint, like
And
we're
even
gonna
the
spend
way, but too, because
$200,000.
sometimes I've had those kind of production notes of just being like, try to lose these locations or whatever. What always stood out is that like he
Yeah,
first asked, right? Like, what was it that I wanted to think? I imagine he'd already thought of this pitch to pitch to me, but well before we had that meeting, right? Like
yeah,
that
yeah.
morning, or someone, him and the line producer or someone else had said, like, you know, it could this or what have you, right? But he asked me first. So it like just
Mhm.
as far as not negotiating, whatever the kind of the tete-a-tete of this kind of back and forth, right? Ask me
Yes,
first. So I'm identifying the things and then offers the thing that answers all the things that I actually was the one that just identified. It wasn't
yes,
even like there's a version of that where he comes in and he's like, listen, it's too big to go to the airport. So can we just like this, that, and that? And from a showrunner or creative perspective, when you frame something like that, what I hear is you just don't want to spend the money and this is clearly the better beat kind of thing, right?
yes,
It already puts me in the mode to try to justify why it does have to be that story wise sometimes. Whereas the
yeah,
way that he did it, it was again by the end of it, it was so very clear the way it still held up the things that I was after. That my only thing was like, yeah, okay, make
yeah.
that note. We'll adjust it in the
I
next
mean,
script, kind of
it's
thing.
the mark of a good producer, right? Of they're trying to
Yeah,
help you get what you want, right? They're
yeah,
problem solving and puzzle solving, right? Of like, here's
yeah,
the pickle
yeah,
we're in. We have this much money. We have to get these beats creatively. How do we do it? And is
yeah.
not just focused on one or the other, right? Like, yeah, sign of a really great producer. But those
The
those,
last thing,
those are the goals. Those
those
kinds
are
of
the
moves.
goals. The last thing I was gonna say before we wrap up, and this is as long as all the others, is the thing, and I purposely left it for the end because it's so often a thing that I think sometimes, especially when development feels like you're working towards the green light or production is ramping up or whatever, that people start to forget is talk about what you fucking like in the notes, right? Like highlight the thing, like even the worst script, right? No one wants
Mhm.
to get back just like people worked on it, contributed, whatever. You really don't have to lie. I'm not a fan of making it up or what have you, but like even if it is, even if I think the script needs a ton of work, it's like, I like these kinds of movies. I'm excited you're writing this, right? Even that lets people know, like, okay, well,
Mhm.
people want this kind of story. At least it's worth it for me to take these notes and try to get it to a place that feels it or what have you. But I'm a big fan of like, LOL, this line is hilarious, right? Or like, I really want to be friends with this character, or you've done such a good job. Like the story clearly still needs to come a long way, but like this scene when you're describing this, I really felt that, right? Or it really hit home or whatever it is. It is, I'd say there's like 99.9% chance. It's like I find it hard to believe there's not one or two redeeming things, even if it's the title. Right, like I
Listen,
like the title primes you well before you go into it to offer someone when you're giving notes on a script.
100%. And even if you can't find the thing that's singing, find the best thing in the script,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
What you're
Yes.
trying to
Yes.
do is say, this is the part that is good. This is the
Yes.
part that is really
Yes.
working.
Yes. Yes.
And it's
Yes.
only working against itself anyway. So, like, yeah, just pick the best parts of it and make sure you underscore that and say, this was my favorite part. Or, like, I
Yeah.
laughed out loud here. Or I
Yeah.
started to actually tear up when this happened. Like, you really got me here. Or,
Yeah.
and I mean, there's a soft way to say lots of stuff. You can say, to your point about like the best friend of like, this is my favorite character. I would love to see more of this character, which is a
Yeah.
way of
Yeah. Yeah.
saying,
Yeah.
hey, versus your leads, they're being
Yeah.
outdone
Yeah.
by this
Yeah.
person and maybe you should pivot and just like there should be more of this person, right? Or
Yeah.
this character,
Yeah.
or this storyline is working kind of better than your A storyline. Like maybe flip them,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
whatever, right? Like those are the kinds of ways that you can nudge without saying so. Of just like, yeah, really leaning in hard to the stuff that you liked the best.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes, like, to the point of just like, to that, you can always even say to things like, I really like this character. It would be great to get more of them. I had some more thoughts, but if you're open to, like, happy to talk more about that if you
Mhm.
want. But really, the upshot is I love this character, as much of them as you could get.
Yeah.
There's also to what was I gonna say? Not about character, not about character. I really like this character. The kind of thing, like I'm a good note to that, where it's like which is honestly, I was kind of along for the ride, but once this happened, the whole
Yeah.
thing really, like, once you got to, for me, the whole story changed, or I got the whole concept once this, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
ways to, again, not overinflate or misrepresent how you felt about the thing, but talk about things that they could maybe lean into that will, like, but
Mhm.
it's, listen, so much of writing, especially nowadays, even when you are a career writer, people are not getting paid like they're used to try and write original ideas that are not being appreciated by people commissioning stories. That we just want to be, yeah, respectful. I think kindness doesn't have to equate lying, or, like, it does none of us any good to overinflate or not, be
Mhm.
honest with, like, work that needs work, right? And still be, you can be kindly critical, I guess,
Yeah.
right? And find a way to kind of deliver that. But there's something to be offered in and when I say something to be offered, I don't mean good on you for finishing a script. It's a lot of it. Don't No, we all know, though, it's a miracle for anything. Yeah, 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 yeah. We know. Find something specific about the fucking thing that I just sent you and tell me that you like it, please and thank you.
Yeah. Yep, yep, yep. True. Yeah. So that's it.
That's it.
That's
What's
it.
the other podcast that you were talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
So many people will know the podcast Script Notes with Craig Mazin and John. His name is escaping me at the moment, but they have a great episode on giving notes. It was part of a presentation they actually gave to producers, I think at Disney or like at one of the major studios, and gave them like a crash course on how to give notes from
Excellent.
a writer's point of view.
Yeah.
And like, I think if you just look up notes episode on Script Notes,
Yes, yes,
you'll
yes.
find it. But yeah,
So take a
super,
look,
super great episode
dive
too.
in, and enjoy. Maybe if it's easy enough to find, I'll put it in the
Oh yeah, the show notes.
show notes. I can put it in show notes. All right. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Yes.
Whoops.
Great to
Check.
see you
All
all. Bye.
right.